Good evening and welcome to Hello It's Us. Hello It's Us is dedicated to educating the general public about issues that are important to the disability community. But we feel through the provision of information on Hello It's Us that we're reaching the entire community because obviously people with disabilities are a part of the general community. Hello It's Us is a collaboration between the University of Iowa Center for Disabilities and Development, Uptown Bill's Coffee Shop, and the good people here at Public Access TV. My name is Mike Hoenig. I work at the University of Iowa Center for Disabilities and Development, and I serve as one of the co-hosts for Hello It's Us. Keith?
I'm the other co-host. My name is Keith Ruff. I'm retired, but I still advocate for disability issues, and I'm writing a book.
Excellent. Well, we are really pleased to have a full house here again today. Many of you will notice that. We're going to be talking about a subject which I think needs to be discussed, and in many cases still, as we'll discuss soon, there's far too much stigma associated with it. And so over the next 2 episodes of Hello It's Us, we are going to do something about that in terms of addressing stigma and understanding services and supports available, and what we'll be talking about mental illness, mental health disorders. We have a group of guests here. We'll ask them to introduce themselves in a minute. I'll just briefly tell you who we have here. In the front row we have Margalee Warner. She wears many hats, including being a peer-to-peer advocate, working with ComPeer. She works as a secretary here at the university, does a lot of volunteer work, and is also a friend. So I'm very grateful that you're here, Margalee.
Thank you, Mike.
Phil Steffensmeyer is here. He is the board president of NAMI of Johnson County, and I'm looking forward, Phil, to getting to know you more. Thank you for coming and joining us here today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
We have Bo Pinkham, who is a video game specialist here. We've just but he also has many hats, including the Crisis Intervention Program Coordinator at the Crisis Center of Johnson County. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. And we have Jessica Peck over here. I've had the privilege of knowing her for a few years, doing some mental health first aid training over the years. She's a Johnson County Jail Alternatives Coordinator here with Johnson County. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us,
Jessica. Yeah. And we have Kathy Johnson, who is the Executive Director at the Abbey Center and has worked there for a good long time. So thank you so much, Kathy, for taking the time to drive down and join us today.
Thank you.
Well, what we'd like to do is just to ask each of you, and we'll just go ahead and for now go in that same order. So Margalee, if you want to start, just to introduce yourself, talk a little bit, just as you're comfortable, about your personal and professional experience in mental health, and then if you'd like to go ahead and just do a basic intro of ComPeer and the services that you provide. And then we'll just we'll follow that model for each of you.
Thank you, Mike. My name is Margalee Warner. I've lived in Iowa City for going on 33 years now. I'm a secretary at university hospitals. That in itself is an accomplishment. I had some rocky times. I was able to get helpful job coaching and computer training at Goodwill when I floundered. And I've kept my job, and there was a time when typos were a terror, and now I have my own typo collection, which is going to be published in Reader's Digest anytime soon.
Sure it is.
I've lived with the mental illness of schizophrenia since my early 20s. I still have symptoms, but they're less common and less disabling. And I couldn't have come to a better place than Iowa City to find friends who share common challenges and goodwill and kindness. ComPeer is nonprofit agency that the goal is to reach out to persons with mental illness that may be isolated and form bonds of friendship with volunteers in the community. I've had some wonderful compeer matches, and we just do things that friends do, ordinary things like going for lunch or secondhand shopping or going to hear a reading at Prairie Lights. Just the fun things that are here to do that don't cost a lot of money, that lift your spirits, and it's something I think it's too easy to take for granted what it's like to have a friend. And I think friendship has saved my life.
Wow. It's a strong testament to the importance of friendship, but also to the program and how important Compeer is. And you serve as a mentor, right? And then you've also done some training.
I'm a peer-to-peer class mentor. Peer-to-peer is a class that NAMI, which stands for National Alliance on Mental Illness, it's a 10-week class taught by persons with mental illness to persons with mental health challenges. And I have taught the class. I took the class as a student. I was trained to be a mentor, and I've been a mentor trainer. It's a little bit like the medical model of see one, do one, teach one. And I consider myself an advocate for peers. And I've advocated for my own sake and for friends as much as I can.
Excellent. You have a busy life going on there. Well, let's move on to Phil. Share a little bit, just as Margalit, with whatever you're comfortable with, and talk a little bit about NAMI of Johnson County, if you would.
Sure. My name is Phil Steffensmeyer, and I'm the president of the board for NAMI of Johnson County. We perform mostly through our signature programs. So we provide speakers on all sorts of mental illness and from all different perspectives. So we get in families, we get in people who have the mental illness themselves, caregivers. So we provide speakers for public engagements. We have Connections, which is a peer-to-peer led support group. We have the peer-to-peer class, which is we offer family to family, which teaches family members how to interact with other family members and to form a community around mental illness. We have a family weekly support group that allows family members to come together and talk even further. We provide NAMI Basics, which provides education for parents dealing with children who have mental illness. I personally have had bipolar disorder for 15 years, and I've had mental illness for a total of 21 years. This is my 4th year on the NAMI Johnson County Board, but I've been involved doing other projects prior to that.
Well, thanks, Phil. One of the things that I'm impressed by hearing that is just the number of the outreach opportunities that NAMI provides. I mean, you're reaching all spheres. You're reaching people with mental illness, you're reaching families, you're providing different opportunities for people to get involved. And as a family member of someone who experiences mental illness, or experienced it, she's passed on now, but I only wish that I had been more involved at the time, because it seems like you've got a little something for everyone that is seeking that type of support. So
That's absolutely right, and there really is hope for improvement in people's condition, so much so that they can come into recovery and live full and meaningful lives themselves. And we want to educate everyone and help them get to that place themselves.
that's terrific. Well, let's turn to, thank you, Phil. Let's turn to Bo for a little bit to talk a bit about the Crisis Center, and again share a little bit about yourself as you feel comfortable, and what you do as a crisis program coordinator.
Yeah, so I'm Bo Pinkham with the Crisis Center of Johnson County. I've been on staff there as the Crisis Intervention Program Coordinator for about nearly 5 years now. Before that, I was a volunteer on their phone lines for about 10 years.
Oh, cool.
And then they made the mistake of hiring me. And they can't get rid of me now. But you know, crisis intervention is a pretty broad topic. But in the idea of where it fits in the mental health field, I use the analogy of we're like the EMTs of mental health. If a therapist or other support providers were like the primary care physicians, we're the ones making sure you're okay for right now and then getting you along to those other referrals. So the Crisis Center now has a number of ways that people can reach out if they feel that they're in crisis. And we don't identify crisis for people, we let them identify what their crisis is. So they can reach out by our phone line, which was kind of our flagship program when we started in 1970. Now there's also crisis chat online and crisis texting services, so people can text a number and we'll support them that way. So number of different ways that people can reach out to us, which has really been awesome in that we can now see a lot of different populations rather than just the ones that use phones, because less and less people actually use their phones as phones anymore. So we've had to diversify, and it's been really good.
Hey, do you know if you've seen an increase in the number of younger people that when you've provided a texting option that people, or a chat option that people that might not have come in otherwise have reached out?
Yeah, it's tremendously different. Like the demographics between the services are just night and day. So chatting, texting is actually a little more half and half as far as like older and younger, but chatting is definitely a young person's game. Our median chatting age is about 16 to 17. Usually a 16 to 17-year-old female. That's how it is. And then on phones, it's I want to say like 35 or 38 or something like that. So
it's a big difference.
Yeah.
Jessica, your turn.
All right, thanks, Mike. I'm Jessica Peckover. I'm the coordinator for the Johnson County Jail Alternatives Program. My background is I'm a licensed independent social worker, and I have a co-occurring licensure through the Iowa Board of Certification as well, since those who we serve in the justice system tend to have both. My background undergrad was in criminology and my master's in clinical social work. So about 10 years ago when I stumbled across jail alternatives, that seemed like a very nice fit with the criminal justice population and the clinical aspect of it. So I've been working in Johnson County at jail alternatives for about 10 years now. And when I started with jail alternatives, it was really a post-booking model. So we worked with individuals who'd been arrested and booked into the Johnson County Jail, and we would meet with them for de-escalation purposes and assessment and referral, and see if they would be eligible for alternatives to incarceration, meaning could we place them in the community, get them set up with services rather than staying in jail? Could they be better served out in the community? And more recently, we've been looking at what things we can do in the community from a pre-booking standpoint. So are there things that we can do to prevent people from even having to enter the criminal justice system? So many of you have probably heard about crisis intervention team training, which is a 40-hour law enforcement training. So we're gearing up to do our first training in March. I was saying forever, March of 2017, and it's 2017 now. So it's barreling down on us, and we're very excited. We have a lot of great officers who've been trained to be instructors. And so the idea with that is that we would train officers and first responders, we're going to include fire and EMS, to be aware of signs and symptoms of mental illness and learn ways that they might be able to de-escalate the situation, and also be aware of community resources so that perhaps they could divert this person to a community-based treatment service or natural support system rather than resulting in an arrest and incarceration.
Boy, that's great. We'll definitely have to have a repeat performance here so we can learn about how that's going, because I think you hear all sorts of jail overcrowding, and obviously the prison system is not a place anybody wants to be, or not many want to be, certainly, and being able to do some things proactively, that's really an exciting thing to think about. We'll look forward to having you back to talk about some outcomes at some point. So, Kathy.
Yes, thank you. My name is Kathy Johnson, and I am the Executive Director at the Abbey Center. And my background also is in social work, and I do have a substance abuse certification as well. I have been at the Abbey Center for 29 years, and so I've done lots of different job positions over that time. Abbey Center has really grown in my time there. So currently we are a community mental health center, and we do cover a 9-county area. Johnson County is one of those areas that we were very fortunate to partner up with Mideastern Mental Health Center, and we had a merge. And so we're very excited about having a presence here in Johnson County. Abbey Center provides what you would consider kind of those traditional clinic services. So that would include medication management with maybe a psychiatrist. We do have therapy, but then we do a fair amount of community-based services. So we do have social workers and nurses that will go to people in their homes and provide services home-based, which is kind of our outreach component to not rely on people coming to us, but to take services to them. We also provide a warm line service, which is a peer-run telephone service for folks between 5 and 10 p.m. if there's there's a lot of people in our community that experience loneliness or kind of situational stress that comes up that they could really benefit from talking to somebody right away. So we do offer that service as well. And then Abbey Center does a fair amount of mental health first aid training, and I know you're familiar with that. But really the key is training everybody in the community in the ability to recognize when someone you know, a neighbor, somebody at your church, a family member who might be having a mental health crisis and knowing what to do to lead them to help.
It's a really exciting program, and several of us have been involved in one way or another with it, and it's, it's I just kind of think about it in layers. So, you might, as you mentioned, see somebody at a church or just, whether it's a training, or you may see somebody out shopping or who knows where. And so, getting them connected to some type of service, whether it's a counselor or somebody that they're familiar with, or even to get them hooked up to the crisis center and generate referral. I mean, it really helps to bring some of that EMT, as you so aptly put it, Bo, experience into the hands of people who might even be one step before the crisis center, so that that they're equipped to handle it as opposed to panicking or just ignoring the situation. So
this is for anyone who feels comfortable answering it. About what percentage of the U.S. population suffers from mental health conditions?
In any given year, 18.5% of people are affected by a mental health condition. So we pretty much just sum it up with 1 in 5 people.
Okay.
Can I just add? Oh,
Go ahead.
I just want to add, I always like to juxtapose that with the justice-involved population.
Yes.
So he mentioned about 1 in 5, so I always round up and say about 20% in the general population. In the criminal justice system, that percentage is more like 50%. And I'm sure Phil would share with you the statistic on those with what they call a serious mental illness is somewhere around 4% of the general population, and we see closer to 17% in the justice-involved population, which is why programs like mine exist.
What is being done to try to rectify that situation besides your program?
Well, I would say nationally there are lots of efforts around that to prevent that from happening. So there are the programs that I've already mentioned with getting law enforcement trained and then helping identify people once they're incarcerated. But I would also say the efforts to adequately fund the community-based system of care is a great way to prevent them from coming into contact with the criminal justice system.
Okay.
And that includes expanding crisis services like Bo was outlining, including mobile crisis outreach. They both had mentioned, going out and meeting people in the community. For about 2 years in Johnson County, we've had mobile crisis outreach. And so there's not just any one thing. It'd be great to say there's one thing to address this. This is multi-layered, but those are just a few of the many.
But I think
Kathy or Bo, could you add to that, please?
Well, I was going to mention, sometimes numbers can be really powerful. So, Phil shared that 1 to 5 ratio. And I think what's powerful about that is, it demonstrates that mental health issues are not uncommon. They're very common. They really are affecting everybody's family or neighbors or friends. I think another number that strikes me as equally kind of powerful is that of those folks who are struggling with a mental health condition, 40% of them are receiving treatment. that leaves 60% that are not receiving treatment. And so, again, I think the more that we can talk about mental health and, make sure that people recognize that all of us need to pay attention to our mental health. One of the real positive things that's happening that I'm pleased with is that there is now a requirement for primary care physicians to add some screenings for mental health difficulties, or particularly for depression. And so the more as people are going into their physician offices and getting screened, it's starting to be talked about. It's starting to be recognized as mental health is part of your overall health and wellness needs.
I just want to share that, I've disclosed on this show previously that I'm a cancer survivor, and early on in the process, it's a big load, and having that question asked of me, and it's kind of funny. I'd taught mental health first aid and so forth, and have lived experience through family members with mental health disorders that, you just kind of go on as, okay, I guess I've got to just bear this burden. And then I got this question asked about, what is the frequency that you're feeling sad? And I thought, oh, this is the good old depression screener. And I filled it out, and it generated a referral to a psychiatrist that deals specifically with melanoma cases. And that was one of the most liberating, I don't want to say that it saved a hospitalization, but it might have. And it certainly improved it gave me permission to talk about it. And so I think that is such a key piece of having that screener. And I just, people who might be watching this show, just how, that get those questions, it's important to truly answer them honestly, because it's not, or it doesn't have to be stigmatizing to admit that and get some help, and shouldn't be considered as stigmatizing. So
I have a question, and anyone can answer if they feel comfortable. Do we think the mental ill people in prison or jail realize the consequences they caused, or is it a mental health blockage?
Well, I think there are a lot of answers to that, and I think there's a spectrum. I think that there are absolutely people who end up in the criminal justice system that engaged in some sort of unlawful behavior because they were completely out of touch with reality, or they were experiencing such emotional intensity that we know that when emotion mind goes up, rational mind goes down. So it really, we certainly see people in the criminal justice system who are symptomatic, and that was really what was driving the behavior that got the attention of the criminal justice system. And we know that there are also people who are involved in the criminal justice system who break the law and also happen to have a mental health disorder, and with addiction. That's a whole nother story, but there's a lot of addiction as well, and a lot of co-occurrence between, as Kathy and I both mentioned, as being licensed clinicians, we both have a co-occurring license for substance use, because we tend to separate those things out, and you really can't effectively separate them out and still serve the person. So that's a big question. It's a good question to ask, and I'd say it's a multi-layered response.
Okay. Anyone else want to add to that?
all right.
I'm just so thorough.
There you go. You just covered it. Well,
Covered it all.
yeah.
Thank you, Melissa.
Well, I wanted to go back to something that I started down a train a little bit ago, and that is the whole idea of, answering the depression screener honestly, and the whole point of stigma. I many years ago, when my mother, for most of her adult life, experienced serious and persistent mental illness, and after one particular hospitalization, the social work staff really strongly encouraged her to seek out mental health services from the community mental health center. And she happened to live in a small rural county. And I talked to her about it, and I said, I think you really need to do that. And she said, I'm not going to go there because people I know will see my car parked in front of the mental health center. And it just reminded me again of the stigma that's still associated with mental illness. And I'd like to think we're making progress. I'd just like to hear any of your thoughts about, first of all, why is it, and I think I know some of the answers just by media reporting, that we keep hearing so-and-so that committed a crime experienced mental illness, and so that generates stigma right there. But why do we still have this stigma? I mean, people aren't stigmatized for having heart conditions and so forth, but yet there's a stigma surrounding mental health disorders. And so comment on that, and then do you feel like we are making inroads, that it's gotten more out in the open and okay to be mentally ill?
4 minutes.
I mean, personally, I'd say we have made inroads. If you just look at all the medications that are advertised these days, you see just right next to diabetes or something, depression, anxiety medications. And I think that's just a big step to kind of normalize the fact that there are treatments for this and that you can access them. I think we have a long way to go, because when we portray mental illness as a health issue, and it is a health issue, but people are raised with this idea that, you can take a pill or go to a doctor and then that will go away, just like a sprained ankle or something like that there is a defined course that this will take. And with mental illness, that's just not how it goes, So
cyclical.
Yeah, we have an expectation of how things will go. And when it doesn't go that way, then we try to kind of define it on our own terms, and that's where stigma comes in. It's like, well, that person is just, that they're always going to be like that, and there's no help for them, which isn't true at all.
Absolutely. We have living proof.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Bo's right, and I think I also kind of see it as a term of a breakdown in the conversation about mental illness, in that some people see shame in their condition, do not talk about it, and that creates a void in the conversation. That void allows people to bring in preconceptions, and people who do not know what they're talking about to bring in other ideas. And I think when we don't have someone who will stand up and say, I have a condition, but I'm okay, then I think that makes it more stigmatizing for the next person to come along in an almost self-perpetuating cycle.
Even though, as Bo said before, it is getting better. But I do notice a lot of people refrain from discussing the subject at all. And I don't mean individuals with mental health. I mean just the common public. They seem to be very quiet about it. Why do you think that is?
I think a few of the reasons have been talked about, and I want to also just mention, because Bo started to allude to it, when we can sort of equalize mental health with physical health, that makes things move forward. And we've seen a lot of movement at the national level with parity and stuff, saying that we're from an insurance and funding level, that mental health and addiction is the same as a physical health. So we start to have that national narrative change a little bit. And I think when you talk about stigma, I think a lot of it is misinformation. I think a lot of times the general public, and it's hard to keep perspective since I'm a licensed clinician, I work in the field, I forget that not everybody talks about it all the time, or that everybody doesn't talk about it all the time. And I think it's that people don't know that you can have a mental illness and be so many other things. That is one piece of one's identity. It's not everything. And I was surprised when I was sharing with one of the officers that I was training to be a CIT instructor, and I said, for somebody who has a diagnosis of schizophrenia, a third of them will have one episode of psychosis, that they lose touch with reality. There's one episode and never again. They may never experience psychosis again. A third will have psychosis. They'll have periods of stabilization or baseline, and they're fully functioning. They have a job. They have relationships. And then there's a third that are just going to have breakthrough psychotic symptoms kind of all the time. And those might be the people you see on the PEDMAL, that no matter what medication they're on, they might. And he was like, you need to make sure that you share that at CIT, because I had no idea. I had no idea that there was diversity among the diagnoses and symptoms, among people with mental illness, and that you can have a mental illness and that you can live a life full of recovery. And I think that the more that story gets out there, I think we'll see some of that stigma go away. But I think it's not historically been talked about.
Yeah. Well, and with that, we are going to have to bring episode 1 to a close. I have a feeling maybe some others of you may want to weigh in on stigma, and that's why we have episode 2 for all of you to enjoy next week. And in the meantime, I want to thank all of our panelists for taking the time out of their day to come and join us today,
Thank
and
you.
also to thank our viewers for watching.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good week out there.